And the first technique is if you're just cutting basic 2.5 axis parts, and if your part has a feature on the opposite side, obviously you're gonna want to turn that over. So on the left, the key to doing this, especially in sheet stock, I mean, basic 2.5 axis won't always be sheet stock, but we're just using a sheet stock as an example. So basically you're adding bridges to the tool path so that the part doesn't become completely separated from the stock when you're cutting the first side. Then after you're done cutting the first side, you'll take the stock off the table, flip the stock over. I have it flipped over along the x-axis, and add your work zero. You'll notice here the work zero is in the same location, bottom left corner. That's important. And on the second side, the flip side, in this example, we're doing another profiling operation, which separates the part from the stock. Just one second. Now, again, here is the a production example of the bridge and flip method using the same part that we showed before. So basically, the important thing to remember in each of these types of flip machining is that the part and the stock are aligned in the center, in the X and Y, and in the Z. Obviously, in a sheet machining like this, your thickness of the stock is most likely going to be the same thickness of your part, so it will automatically be aligned in the Z-axis. But you really need to have it aligned in the X and the Y also. These techniques will only work properly if your part and your stock are aligned, because when you flip that over, you got to have the same condition on the opposite side versus the top side. So here we see the top side of the part. You can't really see the tabs very well, but the tabs are in there. This is maintained as one stock sheet. You can pick that up after setup one. These will all stay in the stock. You flip it over, and then you program side two and run it on the machine, and side two will remove the part from the stock. So that's just basic basic two-axis sheet machining. We'll call it bridge and flip only because you're bridging it. If your table has a vacuum table, you're still going to need the bridges only because you need to take the part off the table and flip it over. So, and then obviously if you have a vacuum table on when you're running the opposite side, it'll help hold the part to the table while you're machining. Okay. While this is displayed, let me just go over another thing here. I mentioned in the presentation, obviously you were asking yourself, well, what if I can't center the part in the stock? What if I need to use part of the stock maybe to fixture it, or anything can happen in the way what you need to do in order to machine a particular part. So you may not be able to align the part and the stock together. So what do? Basically, what I recommend that you do is model your stock in the CAD system. So what we're going to do is we're just going to turn the stock off so we don't see it on the screen. So let's go to a multi-view port. I'm just going to model a box just to represent a stock, irregular stock. So we're just going to do a solid box. Okay. So what we have then is we have your stock modeled and the part. So just physically move the stock and the part together, so that they're aligned the way you want them to be aligned. So we're just going to move this up we're just eyeballing it here where it's the stock and the part is where we want it to be aligned. In this particular case, it's inside the stock and the Z-axis, and it's somewhere off center in the X and the Y. So we can see that a bit better. Yeah. So now that you have your stock modeled, and this applies also if you have an irregular stock, or if you're going to define a stock from selection that you can do in the Pro configuration. A lot of times shops will actually build up, a stock, using wood or whatever materials. This typically doesn't apply to steel, but if you're machining wood, you can glue up your stock model to the shape that you want. And then you can model that shape in the CAD system. So at this point, we're just going to follow the same procedures. We're going to go ahead and create a work 0. We're doing the exact same thing. Bottom left. Okay. Let's double check that again. Okay. So here's another thing to point out. Once you model the stock, let's actually define it. So we're going to define the stock. Here we're just going to pick copy model bounding box. We don't need to put any dimensions because we've already modeled it. Just hit copy model bounding box. It'll snap to your stock box. Pick OK. And then a very important thing to remember, after you have defined your stock, you need to hide your box. Oops, sorry about that. I don't know what this is up there. I guess I didn't grab that whenever I rotated it. See, there's a good point. There's a good point right there. I had to physically rotate that over, and for some reason it didn't grab a couple of surfaces. So now you're scratching your head. I've already flipped it. I already aligned it, but I lost a surface. So now you got to go back and figure it out or do it over or whatever. So with the Pro, it takes care of that. You don't need to worry about that. But I'm just going to hide this. If you don't hide your box and you try to perform a 3-axis operation, it's going to come back and say there's nothing to cut because it can't cut any past your stock box because it's visible. So now, you can go ahead and there's your stock box and go ahead and go through the process of defining your work 0 for one side, and then you're going to flip it over to find the work 0, etc. So this just keeps it all aligned for you together, the part and the stock, and you can make sure it stays aligned together. Okay, so let's go to another part file.